Hair and Now, the podcast about the mind-blowing science of hair growth, where biology, cutting-edge research, and the human experience collide to foster conversations about our follicles. Join host and Nutrafol co-founder Roland Peralta as he explores the amazing intersection of hair and health with doctors, scientists, hair health experts, and special guests. Now, here's Roland with Hair and Now.
Today we're going to be discussing the biotin myth. Our goal today is to bust the biotin myth and to share with you some insights from the science literature. Before I introduce my guest, I'd like to share with you the hair-raising tidbit of the day. Biotin today in Western medicine, residents in dermatology are instructed by their mentors to prescribe 5,000 micrograms of biotin to female patients with hair loss, despite the fact that there is no conclusive evidence of its efficacy. And today, to talk about the biotin myth, I have our guests, Dr. Sophia Kogan, Chief Medical Officer at Nutrafol, and Dr. Melissa Anzelone, naturopathic doctor on the science team at Nutrafol. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Roland.
Can you tell me a little bit about yourselves so we can share with our guests, our listening audience, a little background on yourselves?
Thank you, Roland. My background is in dermatology and ear and head and neck surgery back in my previous life. Currently, I am a specialist in integrative hair loss and treating hair health in a more systems-wide approach. Hence all the research that goes into Nutrafol and the product that we founded as a result of this.
Melissa, a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Roland. My name is Dr. Melissa Anzelone. I have a background in naturopathic medicine, so it's basically a big fancy word for natural medicine. We're taught basically everything MDs are, and then a little bit more. So we learn herbs, we learn homeopathy, and just like Sophie had kind of talked about, we look at it in more a systemic approach.
Terrific, terrific. Two qualified experts. So today I want to talk about a paper that was published in JDD, the Journal of Drugs and Dermatology, in May of 2017. And it was a paper written by Dr. Jerry Shapiro at New York University. He's a renowned hair researcher. He's world-renowned in hair research. And the title of the paper, I believe, was the infatuation of biotin supplementation. And what I wanted to discuss with you both today is some details from the paper and how that ultimately impacts Western medicine in how hair loss, hair growth is treated. So let's talk about the paper. I know you both have read the paper. I think it's a great paper. We've been trying to bust the biotin myth for the last 4 years, trying to help people who have been instructed by their physicians to reconsider the use of biotin. Do you want to give me a little background on biotin in Western medicine?
Sure. So I think the paper basically summarizes what we've been talking about for a while here at Nutrafol and amongst the research community, and that is that there's a precedent. There's sort of like a thing that doctors do, and I think it comes from not having enough options. Or not being exposed to enough possibilities or possible options. And until not too long ago, there were very, very limited options for women. Just basically the only FDA-approved medication, which is minoxidil or Rogaine. And so being a resident, I was struggling with hair loss patients, as anyone does in residency. Nobody really wants to see their hair patients because there's no solutions, and so it's a very sad encounter for the most part. So in order to be able to give something to the patient to even just whether or not it has a great supportive evidence or it doesn't, but kind of a do no harm mentality, we always very much recommended Rogaine and a biotin. And without any real idea as to whether or not it was helpful or not.
Why wouldn't you prescribe pickles?
It's a good question.
So what I'm
Pickles
hearing,
are probably going to be great for you because they're a great probiotic. But
I would agree with that. So what I'm hearing you say is that essentially you were writing a prescription for endless hope. You're essentially, a woman comes to you in a Western clinic, tells you that she's losing her hair, and because you don't know what else to do, you're prescribing Rogaine or minoxidil with 5,000 micrograms of biotin.
without being a specialized hair clinic, like for instance in Dr. Shapiro's case, where he's a great hair loss specialist, so he has a lot of things that he uses off-label. Without being a specialized hair clinic, no, we didn't really have too many other options at all. So in a sense, yeah, it was sort of like, well, it worked for some people, maybe, we've heard, and so therefore, here you go.
It seems so counterintuitive that doctors who are sticklers for data would prescribe a supplement, of all things, to a woman with hair loss that has absolutely no evidence of efficacy. So I know, for example, in the JDD article written by Dr. Shapiro's team, they mentioned a study in 1965. 49 women were given biotin. They didn't discuss the dosage in the study, but they discussed giving these women in a clinical study over 12 months biotin. And the outcome was it showed no signs of resolving hair loss or promoting hair growth whatsoever. Yep. So you would think that physicians would use that study as an argument for, let's stop writing prescriptions for endless hope and let's get to the root of the problem. Do you feel guilty having prescribed biotin to women, knowing that it has no evidence of efficacy?
No, I don't feel guilty.
I know that Melissa would probably beg to differ. Naturopaths have a different way of looking at
I don't feel guilty because there is no, there was no solution, and we didn't have the supplements like Nutrafol, for instance, and without knowing for sure, I think that there's also this thing about patients wanting a solution, patients wanting something. So it's a matter of, I think as a physician, it's hard to find that line of where you're trying to help a person, but at the same time not hurt them and give them some reasonable hope for continued, living. The way their hair looks is only part of their life, and so to make sure, to not give them anything at all is also not doing a service to them. So in a sense, I think that the reason why biotin became so popular, and the paper keeps on talking about really sensationalism within the media, etc. That's just one aspect of it. I think the other is that there really wasn't anything available to doctors, and so I think doctors are responsible for the fact that there was such a sensationalism as well. But also they're responding to the people. If somebody comes in and asks them, does biotin help? I'm going to say, look, there's no evidence, but some people say it does, so here you go.
Right.
So I don't feel guilty because you don't want to shut people down in the same way. So without having options available to us before, I think it was a reasonable choice. Whereas today, of course, we have many more options like PRP, like nutraceuticals, botanicals, that we can utilize, and that's our job to educate the doctors to the availability of these options.
Correct. So we know that as of today, no other clinical studies have been conducted on the use of biotin in any form of alopecia.
There have, it's just that they didn't reasonably come back with good results. I believe the only real, the only improvement that was seen was in nails, clinically, and also for in cases of biotin deficiency.
Right, which is very rare. Biotin, as we know, is produced in the gut.
Right.
It's vitamin B7, right?
B7,
or
yep.
vitamin H, I
Vitamin
think.
H,
Vitamin
yeah.
H. I think
Hair.
H for hair, right?
H for hair in German,
I don't
yep.
know how did they end
Har.
up with a secondary name for, you can call it vitamin B7 or vitamin H.
H, yeah.
And Har, I think it was for hair. So what is what does the body do with vitamin B7? What's the purpose of biotin in the human body?
It's actually a cofactor for a bunch of different enzymes that break down fatty acids, amino acids, which are small blocks of protein, or even carbohydrates. So it's really an essential cofactor for getting all of that energy out of those components. So I get the theory behind it. I get the theory behind why Western doctors were like, okay, if we increase this cofactor, we can break down things better and we can get more energy, because hair follicles require so much energy, right? They have all these little mitochondrial powerhouses around them that break down this food and release energy. So I get the theory, but Roland, you're absolutely right when you're saying the biotin comes from the gut itself. So, you know, in the United States, biotin deficiency is really rare. You know, we don't see that here.
Right, it's interesting.
Here's one of the ways you can get it is if you eat raw eggs.
Yep.
Which was a thing back in...
right, we don't do that anymore.
Yes,
I think
back in the day.
salmonella
Thankfully.
becomes the issue, right?
Yeah, so
does
unless you're-
salmonella trigger hair loss?
I mean,
No,
probably for some ways or another.
Some
but
way, right?
there's a protein in raw eggs. It's called avidin, and if you, as much as there's biotin in eggs, but if you actually eat them raw, it will bind the biotin and not allow it into your system. So if you're consuming raw eggs,
I see.
which means that you're, I don't know, bodybuilder or
Right, so
what does that
bodybuilders
do?
would typically, right? So they
I know back in Russia we used to
eat raw eggs.
It's
right.
it was a thing.
So the advice as a doctor, don't eat raw eggs because it'll interfere with biotin, consequently leading to hair loss.
Yes.
Yes,
Right,
and
that's
one of
essentially
the other ways is valproic acid. So that's an anti-seizure medication, and it has an effect on an enzyme that releases biotin for it to be used in the system. So there has been evidence in literature, and Dr. Spear talks about it in the paper, that if you give biotin to people who are suffering from hair loss due to anti-seizure medication, specifically valproic acid, in which case the hair loss is linked to the biotin deficiency. In that case, it helps.
Interesting. I
So
remember.
if you're eating raw eggs or anti-seizure medications, or if you have severe malabsorption, like your body is not absorbing enough nutrients, there's some sort of a process happening usually when people require to be receiving, or really sick and they're receiving nutrients through their veins sometimes.
When you say severe, so malabsorption as a consequence of of gut dysbiosis, perhaps, or is
I
that
would say
not
something
severe
more
enough?
severe.
More severe.
More severe, yeah. Maybe more like a pancreatic insufficiency, a true, decrease of significant amount of digestive enzymes, or some sort of stress picture. I'd say more of a chronic stress picture would lead to the
I would say even more
malabsorption.
severe, like if you had surgery or like inflammatory bowel disease or other really big, big GI issues. But it's incredibly rare because, like Melissa was saying, the bacteria in our gut actually constantly produce biotin. So, and that's actually why there's no real recommended daily amount. So there's no RDA for biotin because we produce it.
We're not
We're not
deficient. We're not
but
deficient.
our little friends.
Our gut bacteria, exactly. I think too, there was an interesting disease that they had mentioned in the article itself. They called it uncombable hair disease, and it's actually a rare genetic disorder where your hair appears very frizzy, blonde, and unmanageable. And they were saying in this very small cohort that these people also suffered from biotin deficiency.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Well, that's called genetic versus acquired.
So acquired would be just a bad hair day syndrome.
No.
Exactly.
No, this one is genetic. So this is actually some children are born with a deficiency in either the enzyme that takes biotin out or and that's usually the case. And then In those situations, of course, that's a genetic variation, and so you would require biotin supplementation.
Interesting. So I know the article summarized how the media has been talking about all the benefits of biotin. So it's anecdotal, naturally, but how is it possible that people in the media can continue to keep a story running for 30, 40 years, and yet there's no evidence that it actually works?
That's a great question. And I was
Fake
reading
news.
Fake news.
Makes sense.
We've got something for the Don to talk about. So here we have a great example of fake news. This is really fake news. So the first time I heard about biotin, I was in my 20s, and I confess, I took it in my late 20s. I started noticing the beginning of excess hair loss in the shower, and my hairstylist told me about it. And at the time, you assume that hairstylists are on the front lines of all things related to hair.
Sure.
So when your hairstylist tells you to do something, you're likely to do it. And I did. I probably did it for 6 months and didn't really notice any less shedding in the shower. So I dropped it. But it's pretty frightening to think that there are millions of stylists in this country, and that it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, biotin, and yet stylists continue to tell their clients to use biotin if they're experiencing hair loss. Who else? Physicians,
Doctors.
Certainly doctors, right?
Sure.
Blogs.
Yeah. So it'll be a big challenge finding a way to halt the myth. What do we need to do? So, for example, one of my personal pet projects at Nutrafol is how do we change the standard and guidelines? The American Academy of Dermatology, I went on their website last night, and they talk about biotin, about the use of biotin for women, they mention it, despite the fact of clear evidence.
Yeah.
So the American Academy of Dermatology is still talking about biotin, despite the fact that there's no evidence of its efficacy. I understand that in clinical textbooks, biotin is essentially, it's published, and residents are essentially told that they need to be using, again, prescribing biotin. Changing the standard of guidelines is one way, essentially messaging from the top, right? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I just wanted to make a comment. I don't think it says in the textbooks to, it doesn't tell residents to use biotin. It just says it's an option. And it does usually say what the American Academy of Dermatology says, which is that it doesn't have clear evidence, but it is it's sort of like within the options.
So they're hoping. Are they essentially hoping for a placebo effect? Is that essentially what you're saying?
I don't think so. I think it's essentially saying that there's no clinical data, but there's some anecdotal reports, right? Or maybe it's just commonly used, or not given as much importance, in a sense that it doesn't hurt. Again, there's this sort of like,
right.
It doesn't hurt. Now, what I think is important to know now is that, when you go to your hairstylist and your hairstylist tells you, you take 10 milligrams of biotin a day, and that's what's been happening really. Physicians recommend anywhere from 3 to 5. Now, I don't know if there's some physicians that do more, but when you start to go up to 10, that we know now, FDA just released a warning that there are supplements out there with really exuberant amounts of biotin for a daily amount. And what happens is that these, when somebody takes that much, they've shown, there was a warning that came out a couple of months ago that basically said that it can interfere with some blood work. So if you, for instance, go and take...
There was a troponin, someone died of a heart attack.
Or, I can't remember if it's somebody died or if it, but basically
there was a death.
Thyroid and heart, certain heart tests like troponins, they are shifted. That it can shift the measures.
It can mask it.
It can
Mask
thank
it,
you very much.
yeah.
It can mask the actual results if you have a very high amount of biotin in your system.
Right.
So that's where I think we just need more education. So how do you bust the myth? You have to really create a lot of education, and that's kind of what we're doing right now. Is it's a myth. It doesn't help. I don't think it hurts in smaller amounts, but if you start to take mega doses, that could be a problem.
So I wanted to share a personal experience with you all. When I'm attending a CME, which is a continuing medical education conference hosted by dermatologists or plastic surgeons, more often than not, I will have a physician ask what's in it, and more often than not, they'll ask, do you have biotin? So what I like to do is I tend to pivot the conversation to switch as an opportunity for education. So rather than focusing on biotin, which is it's assumed that there is a nutritional deficiency in your diet, I begin to focus on what are the other real factors that contribute to hair loss. So I'll start talking about the anti-inflammatory botanicals. So we'll start introducing inflammation. Very often people don't talk about inflammation as part of their hair loss research or their story. I'll talk about the stress adaptogens in Nutrafol. I'll talk about boosting antioxidants. Let's talk briefly about, we know that biotin doesn't work on its own. But what we do know is that inflammation is one of the multiple triggers that's at the root of hair loss. Can you just talk about inflammation briefly and how it impacts the hair growth cycle? What can you share with us?
Sure. Well, so lucky for us, there's a lot of new research that's coming out that every day there's a paper published on hair research. So I think there's a huge interest in what's happening, and whereas before we were taught that there was, genetics were pretty much all to think about, and especially in your common types of hair loss, like the male and female pattern type, we always thought that it was just androgens or male hormones that are present in women and men, of course, more so in men.
You're talking about DHT.
DHT, yes. And it was, therefore we only have a couple of solutions available today that are regulated by the FDA, or drugs or medications. Like Propecia, finasteride, it targets dihydrotestosterone, or the DHT molecule, which is the male hormone. So lucky for us, there's a wealth of knowledge and information that's coming out now at this time, led by many new hair researchers that talk about the fact that there are both environmental and genetic components involved in hair loss. And this is what we've been talking about for a long time, and sort of bringing that awareness to the doctors that we talk to or we deal with. But on a bigger scale, so the couple of things that we often talk about that cause inflammation at the follicle are environmental factors like UV light, or pathogens, or meaning like anything that enters or is surrounding your scalp, or even toxins that we're exposed to, smoke, etc. It's all of these things that definitely create free radicals and inflammation at the follicle. And then of course there's stress. Lots to talk about stress, but just to keep it short, stress, there's any other illnesses that you may have, or any other imbalances in your system, hormonal imbalances. All of these will ultimately create an inflammatory state around the follicle where it's really just it's not optimized. So as a result of that, the follicles have a very fine-tuned mechanism for hair cycling. That is, what we mean by that is that each follicle has its own biological clock. So it all kind of cycles at its own pace, sort of irrespective or independent of the other one. So, and that biological clock is regulated very tightly by a range of pathways and molecules and signaling molecules. And when you have inflammation that is present around the follicle, those molecules get disrupted. And so you start to produce more inflammatory molecules that will ultimately shift this very fine-tuned mechanism into more hair loss than growth.
So inflammation begets inflammation.
Right, and it's sort of a cycle that continues on and on and on. It's slow and insidious versus something that happens right away. So it does damage the follicle right away. It really just kind of puts it out of balance and happens really over a prolonged period of time.
Interesting. So to summarize, signaling molecules are essentially disrupted in the presence of inflammation. But that's pretty much in all disease, right? And follicles are many organs.
True.
And it's typically, what do we say, that inner beauty, what is it?
Inner wellness is a
inner
reflection
wellness
of
is
outer wellness.
Thank you.
Definitely.
And so if your hair is falling out excessively, or if your hair has stopped growing, which is an indication that essentially hair production has been halted somehow. You may not be seeing hair loss, but suddenly I have women all the time telling me, my hair stopped growing, I don't know what to do, and it's beginning to break, etc. How do you address inflammation? Do you take a Tylenol?
Melissa, answer that question.
That's a great question, Roland. So Tylenol is definitely an anti-inflammatory. However, there are better ways, I think more natural ways to address that inflammation. So for example, in our Nutrafol, we have curcumin, which is a really potent anti-inflammatory, which is going to reduce those mediators of inflammation and put that hair growth cycle back on track, right? Because normally we should have the anagen, the growth phase, the catagen, the regression phase, telogen, and then the exogen where the hair falls out. So those inflammatory mediators that Dr. Kogan was talking about, those are either pushing us into catagen for a longer period of time or pushing us into that early telogen, which is the step right before we're releasing the hair follicle.
The resting phase.
Yep, exactly.
I used to say telogen. Hair is having a cup of tea and taking a little break from producing hair. So now curcumin is an extract of turmeric, right?
Turmeric, correct.
And we know that turmeric has been used in Ayurvedic medicine for forever.
Thousands of years.
And I think, what did we say? What it was the last time we counted? How many studies in the literature on curcumin did we see? 6,000?
No,
10,000?
Wow.
Over
40?
10,000? No, was it that many?
40,000?
So I think, but the conclusion that we came to was it is the most studied botanical in the history of humanity. There are more clinical studies on the benefits of curcumin than any other botanical, I believe, right? I think
I
pretty
believe
much,
so, yes.
Makes sense. You figure, the Indian population has used it for thousands of years, whether it's, as medicine or in food, so they know all the
Food
great
is medicine.
properties. Exactly.
Right. So what could we conclude, if could we wrap up on that note? Could we conclude that if a physician had to choose between recommending curcumin and recommending biotin, which of the two ingredients have more scientific basis for its use in Western medicine in treating people with hair loss or
Definitely the curcumin. Curcumin has so much more behind it, whether it's anecdotal or actual studies, where biotin just has that anecdotal kind of media hype behind it.
Right. So that's the opinion of a naturopathic doctor, right? And as a Western doctor, how would you argue that if you were to argue with colleagues, if you had to choose between biotin and curcumin, how would you argue on behalf of curcumin?
I think you can argue mechanism of action. Of course, we have a couple of studies that maybe talk about topical application of curcumin, and of course we have a study for Nutrafol that combines curcumin with other ingredients. So if that
was a paper published in
journal,
JDD, right?
Yes, Journal of Drugs and Dermatology,
November?
and
May of 2018.
2018, yes. So of course I am of the mindset that curcumin will probably do a lot more good for your body and your hair than an extra dose of biotin, which is ultimately produced by the bacteria in your gut anyway. So I think if anything, that already kind of makes more sense.
Well, there you have it. Can we put that in writing and slip that into the printer the next time the Bologna dermatology textbook gets printed, or the somehow hack into the American Academy of Dermatology and recommend curcumin over biotin?
Yeah, mix it up into your daily chai.
So I think that was great. Thank you very much. I think that was hopefully that was some great insight for everyone in our listening audience. Did you want to add anything, Dr. Melissa, Dr. Sophie, before we sign off?
I don't think I have anything else to add about curcumin per se or biotin. I think that, in conjunction, say biotin with other things such as, collagen, keratin, I think that's where we're seeing, the best results, basically. And that's really where people might be talking about biotin, but maybe not, maybe talking more about a hair, nails, and skin supplement. That's been my experience clinically. So maybe they're just kind of confounding that data with more of a hair nail growth supplement.
Yeah, I think I'd second what Dr. Melissa is saying, and in that biotin alone hasn't been shown to produce any impact on hair growth. But we do put it into our supplement as well, and I think that as a cofactor, it may have some effect when it's put into in conjunction with others. So if you have a nutritional deficiency, of course it could help. That's extremely rare. So it's been more encompassing when we're talking about improving hair growth and targeting hair loss, where we can combine other ingredients, but predominantly, botanicals, if possible, that can target those inflammation, the stress, and the hormonal imbalances, whereas maybe it is in conjunction with biotin that helps some of that nutritional
Terrific.
Part.
Great. So in conclusion, the jury is out, biotin's out, and curcumin is in. What else can we say? I think do your homework, really, is what we say. Do your research. Don't believe your stylist. Don't always believe what people tell you. I always recommend do your research. Be the wellness warrior that you need to be in 21st century living today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And
Thank you,
thank you for listening. Feel free to go to our website, nutrafol.com, where you'll see bios on myself, Dr. Melissa, Dr. Kogan. And if you like what you heard today, please go to iTunes and subscribe. Feel free to subscribe to our YouTube page and our social media. Thank you. Look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks for listening to Hair and Now with host and Nutrafol co-founder Roland Peralta. See you next time.